Are oil prices pushing us into a recession? Should you prioritize a high-fee 401k over your Roth IRA? And do you want to watch an awkward white guy navigate rap culture? If so, stick around. Money, get to the bag. Welcome back to the Personal Finance Club show. Hey, Jen.
Hey, Jeremy. We live?
So we're actually live right now, kind of. I decided just on a whim to go live on Instagram. And so I set my phone kind of off to the side, catching a more wide angle view of like the lights and the computer and the set behind me. It's not that fancy, just like in a bedroom at my home that I've kind of made into a podcasting set. And I realized that, I'm wearing like a, polo shirt with a collar, but then on the bottom I'm just wearing some
right. The
Lululemon
comments are
shorts.
thoughts on the S&P 500 and also, wow, those legs. Haha.
Okay. Well,
love the bare feet.
I hope that you can see my feet too. I've never I set up like at a tripod, halfway across the room. So I actually don't even know what it looks like.
I'll take a screenshot so you can see the.
Oh yeah, take a screenshot. Okay, great.
Oh my God, it's so funny.
So
also,
if you're one of those live watchers, what'd you say?
This is a scam. The tiles only go halfway across the wall.
Oh, that's true. It's all everything's fake. Everything's fake. No, I mean it is actually real. It's real. Can move this stuff back here.
It's not a green screen.
Not a green screen.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah, the tiles.
All right, this is exciting.
I think the tiles help with the sound a little bit.
Sure.
All right, so we're live. You are listening to this as the podcast. Maybe you can watch it live. And if you're listening live, you can only hear my voice. You can't hear Jen's because we're not that tech savvy yet. Maybe we'll figure that out in the future if this is a hit. Mm-hmm. But anyway, should we do the podcast?
Yeah, let's get into it.
What's our first segment?
Hot topics.
What is today's hot topic?
Okay, I have a Forbes post that says economists warn rising oil prices may push U.S. into a recession. We talk a lot on this podcast for the past 6 months, but I don't know if we've directly addressed recession threats. What are recession indicators, as they say, and what does it mean to be in a recession?
Yeah, so a recession is one of those things that it's just thrown around a lot. We're in a recession. We're in a recession. We're going to be in a recession. And it just is this bad economic thing. And what it is basically when a recession means the economy is in a noticeable decline, meaning we're selling less stuff, fewer jobs, less money. And normally in a normal American economy, we want things to be growing. And so, and there's a bunch of indicators, and the economy is a very complicated thing. It's made up of companies and consumers and lenders and money and stocks. And, there's a million different little things that make up this thing we call the economy. And so to say yes or no, we are a recession, we are not a recession is kind of a tricky distinction to make. And so some of those indicators you mentioned are, first, a big one is the GDP, the gross domestic product. That's basically our best guess at adding up all the money for all the stuff, the goods and services that's sold in the country in a year. That's the gross domestic product. So everything Amazon sells, everything Walmart sells, everything, Boeing and flights and transportation and medicine and all the stuff everyone sells added up together, that's the gross domestic product. Normally that's growing, but if it's shrinking, that's a signal that we might be in a recession. But it's not the only signal. There's also things like rising unemployment. If the gross domestic product is shrinking, but then there's more and more people have jobs, those are kind of conflicting. You're okay, well, what's going on here? Is that a recession? And I'll tell you who decides in a sec. Lower consumer spending. If you look at all the money consumers are spending, if they spend less quarter to quarter, and these things are measured quarterly, every 3 months, they look at these things and decide. And I'll tell you who they are in a sec. Falling business activity. For example, if there's less manufacturing, if retail sales are down, that could be an indicator of a recession. And finally, financial strain. Things like companies having reduced earnings, the stock market dropping, lending being tighter, lenders, but banks not wanting to lend as much money. All these things are kind of indicators of a recession. So you can imagine a scenario where it's very extreme. We have 4 quarters in a row of declining gross domestic product. Unemployment is skyrocketing. Consumer spending is plummeting. Manufacturing and retail are dropping. All the companies are experiencing reduced earnings, the market is dropping, lending is tighter. If every single one of those is true, I think everyone would agree, okay, that's a recession. We're officially in recession. And so then the question is, okay, well, when do we cross that line? And there's actually an organization called the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, and they decide when we're in a recession. And so some interesting points about this. I think as much as there is any sort of pop culture concept of a recession, I think the pop culture concept of a recession is 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. So that's saying, okay, in Q2, if we as a country sold less stuff than we did in Q1, that's negative growth. And if that happens again in Q3, 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, a lot of people say that's a recession. And technically that's not true, because again, that's only one of the indicators. If the other indicators are all really positive, and maybe that, reduced GDP growth is like a lagging metric for some reason from previous years or whatever, the NBER might say, no, we don't think this is actually a recession. We think that things are actually still growing. This isn't negative growth overall. It's just one indicator. And this actually became a little bit of a political issue back in early 2022. Do you remember this, Jen, at all, where Trump was losing his mind for like a week over it not being called a recession?
No, I can't keep up with what goes on with that man.
And the list of Trump losing his mind is like way down the list. But in Q1 of 2022, we had negative GDP growth. And then Q2 came around, and early indications were saying, okay, this might be a negative quarter again. And so then Trump's like, this is a recession, this is Bidenomics, blah, blah, blah. It turns out, by the way, when the GDP numbers came in, GDP growth was positive in Q2 of 2022. It was positive 0.6%. In fact, in Biden's 15 quarters he was president, 4 years times 4 quarters is 16 quarters as president. 15 of those had positive growth. And so it wasn't like there was like this huge negative growth under Biden. There's 1 quarter where it was negative in 2022. And so, it was this, I remember maybe just because I like follow stuff more like in my newsfeed or whatever, but all the right-wing people were saying, this is officially a recession. And then the NBER had to say, excuse me, technically we define recessions, and there's no strict rule about 2 quarters of GDP decline. And in fact, we don't even decide if it's a recession. This is like now my nerdy voice. Until months later. Because, they don't know all that, it's very hard to like collect all these numbers because the economy is a big, complex place, and the numbers take a while to filter into the people who need them or whatever. And so recessions are often declared after they already started. So it might be maybe Q3 of 2026 when the NBER says, hey, we're in recession starting in Q1, by the way, because that's when all these metrics started that we're now all able to process. And so the last actual recession that happened was back in 2020 when, shit
What
hit the
happened
fan.
in 2020?
I know, every time I hear the number 2020, everyone like shudders, like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as of course you remember, COVID came, like everything shut down, GDP just plummeted, employment skyrocketed, consumer spending plummeted, business, like every single thing pointed to it. And it was actually relatively short because, 1 or 2 quarters later, it kind of like mostly came back, and we've all been dealing with the echo effects ever since. But in 2020, that was our last recession. And then there's been none declared since then. And so, you sent me a headline about economists warn of recession fears. I feel like they could post that every single week for all of eternity, just because there's always some reason to think that in the future this might happen. And this headline says rising oil prices may push U.S. into a recession, because rising oil prices mean it's more expensive to ship things, mean consumer spending might go down, which means unemployment might drop, which means GDP might, like all these things are kind of linked to each other to some degree. And so it makes for a really snappy headline to say, hey, oil prices are going up. That's going to grind the economy to a halt. We're going to be in a recession. Is that true? Possibly. I don't know the future. I certainly don't think it's like true yet, or certainly the NBER hasn't declared it to be true yet. But I think, this is Personal Finance Club show, not macroeconomics show. And personally, this has like very little to do with our lives. I remember I was an adult during the Great Recession, the 2008 financial crisis, which was, after the Great Depression in the 1930s mostly. I think a lot of people consider the Great Recession to be like the next biggest financial crisis. And I was starting a company at that point. It was like a little internet company, and I was trying to sell things. And I remember probably less than, but people would ask, they say, hey, how is the recession impacting your business? And my answer is like, I don't know. I'm trying to sell more than I did last year. Our growth trajectory has way more to do with how good our product is and how good we're selling and how good the referrals are, and the million little things that go into growing a business. And the macroeconomic picture of inflation or um, unemployment being slightly higher had very little effect, as far as I could tell, on the growth trajectory of my own business. And if it did have an effect, it wasn't really visible to me. It was kind of like an invisible headwind. I was like, oh, we're not selling as much. I don't really know why people aren't saying, Jeremy, we're in a recession, so I'm not going to buy your product. It just kind of was what it was. And so, and that was me starting a business. I think as you as an individual, it has even less to do with you. It's like, do you still have your job? If yes, it's kind of business as usual. Is your job more likely to lay you off? Yeah, maybe you should be aware of that. But I think that has way more to do with how your company's doing than how all companies are doing, right? Sometimes layoffs happen not during a recession. That impacts the employees of that company. And oftentimes during a recession, you don't get laid off, and that doesn't impact you, right? So, I wouldn't get overly scared about a recession. Stay on your lane, focus on growing your own income, living below your means, investing early and often. And certainly don't change your investment strategy. I think a lot of people think, oh, if we're going to be in a recession, shouldn't I sell my stocks now and then buy it after the stock market goes down? And the answer is no, because that has probably already been priced in. If we're going to be in a recession, the stock market already knows that, and it's too late. And any sort of jumping in and out of the market, as I always say, is much more likely to hurt you than help you. So, doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. In conclusion, doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
I mean, it might be sad for the country if we're in a recession, but recessions are often usually very short. They're measured in months, not years, and they're usually less than a year. And so, if a recession happens, that would be sad, I guess. But yeah, I find myself being very conscious of the live thing all of a sudden, because I'm like, oh, they can't hear Jen. Maybe this is
That's
like
okay.
a bad...
I'm not really saying anything interesting. I did see somebody, H Dragon 23 said, "Sup, Germ," if you want to shout him out.
H Dragon 23 is commenting on the live. Now, this is like a hybrid live recorded podcast?
Well, we got to keep the people engaged. So why don't you shout out H Dragon 23?
Didn't I say H Dragon 23? I said that, I thought.
Say hi.
Hi, H Dragon 23. All right. Enough with the live people. They're not committed. The podcast listeners, they're committed. They're here for like the hour. The Instagram live people, they're like, what's going on here? Swipe, swipe, swipe. You podcasters, you got an attention span that's longer than 5 seconds. Us social media.
Wow,
people
not you roasting the people watching you actively. That's hilarious. Okay, let's move on to money. Can I ask a dumb one?
Are you asking a smart question to a dumb person? Maybe. What's the question?
Maybe. Okay, we've got a question from Luca. My name is Luca. I'm 23 and currently living in Miami, Florida. In August 2025, I started my first full-time job as an analyst, earning $65,000 a year. My question is, my employer offers a 401k with no match, and all available investment options have gross expense ratios around 1% or higher. Should I contribute to this 401k or continue investing only in my Roth IRA, where I've been maxing it out for the past 2 years and currently invest in FSKAX and FZILX, both with very low expense ratios?
All right. First of all, Luca, that was like an excellent question. You said your name, you said your age, you said where you're from, and then you gave like a really... Did you edit this down? Did he send it like this?
No, this is how he asked it.
Oh my God, Luca, you're crushing it. In terms of like, you win like the question of the year award for the podcast so far, because this is great. And it was like a really good question and gave all the necessary details in a nice, concise manner. All right. So your question is, all right, I have a 401k, but appears to be kind of a shitty 401k. There's no match, and then the expense ratios are high. And so should I use it still, or should I do the Roth IRA? This year, the Roth IRA max contribution limit is $7,500. You said you've been maxing out the past 2 years, which is insanely amazing, by the way. You are absolutely crushing it. You're 23. You've already maxed out your Roth IRA 2 years in a row, and you're listening to the Personal Finance Club show. If I could bet $1 million on whether or not Luca was going to be a millionaire, I would, like, short of him dying in some sort of horrific train accident or something. And trains are notoriously safe. I don't even know why I mentioned trains, but I would be gladly bet $1 million that Luke is going to be a millionaire, because this is the kind of mindset that makes him a millionaire. He's already maxing out his IRAs and he's listening to the Personal Finance Club show. How amazing. So yeah, you're putting $7,500 in this year. That's 11.5% of your gross, which is for 23 really good. So I mean, 7,500 divided by 65,000, how much you make, that's 11.5%. After taxes, you live in Florida. I made a couple assumptions, but you're probably taking home around $55,000 per year. And that means you're actually investing about 13.6% of your take home, which is really good. A really, really rough rule of thumb is like 10 to 20%, 15%. And, you're right in there in terms of investing until you're in a healthy retirement. But I'll do you one further. I put all of your numbers into the calculator, the retirement calculator at hellonectarine.com. And it assumes you're spending about $4,000 a month, which is how much you have left over after your taxes and investing. And that means you're saving $7,500 per year. If you do nothing else but exactly that, what you're doing at 23 for the next 42 years until you're 65, which is not going to happen, by the way, things are going to change. But assuming you just stay on this exact trajectory, when you're 65, you have $2.1 million invested, and that's accounting for inflation. That's in today's dollars. And you'll have a 99% chance of a successful retirement after age 65. In fact, doing nothing but exactly what you're currently doing, you're actually on pace to retire healthily at about the age of 57. And so, big strokes, you're absolutely crushing it. To your question, I would prioritize the IRA. Our investing guidelines is do the 401k up to your match. If you have an HSA, you can use that. And then the next step is your Roth IRA. Since you have no match, you skip it. You didn't mention HSA. Let's assume you skip it. So that means your first priority is maxing out your Roth IRA. You're doing it great. If you want to invest more, you could then go put, let's say if you had $2,500 more per year to invest, you could go put $2,500 into your 401k. That would be great. $7,500 Roth IRA, $2,500 401k. That would be great. If you did that, by the way, it would drop your projected retirement age from 57 down to 53. That's 4 years. When you're 23, hearing the numbers 57 and 53, you're probably thinking like, put a bolt in my brain. What's the difference? I'm going to be like the crypt keeper rotting in a grave or whatever. But when you're 50, I'm 45 and I'm not that old. And when you're 50, you're like, oh, I could retire in 3 years or 7 years. Like 4 years of your life makes a big difference, right? And that's 4 years. Think about a week of paid time off. What about a year of paid time off or 4 years of paid time off? And that's just getting down to 53. What if you retire at 50 or 45 or 40 or whatever it is? The numbers start to get pretty meaningful. So here's the thing. Bottom line, you're totally crushing it. If I could bet $1 million on you being a millionaire, I would. If you want to invest more and you have the means to invest more, going to your 401k would be totally fine. The 1% fee is a little bit annoying, but people generally switch jobs every 2 or 3 years these days. When you switch jobs, you can roll over. That means transfer your old 401k to either your Roth IRA or an individual traditional IRA, and then leave those high expense fees and invest it just like the same way you are your Roth IRA. And by the way, your ticker symbols are great. But I'll say the flip side of this is you have another really amazing asset to your name right now, which is your youth. You're 23. You said you have your first job. I'm surmising you just got out of college. You're kind of starting adulthood officially here. And you can do things in your 20s that you can't do in your 30s. And you can do things in your 30s you can't do in your 40s and so on and so forth. And so I warn you, Luca, don't live your life trying to maximize every single penny when you're 65, because you'll get to be 65 and you're going to be like, what did I do with my life, right? And I hate the word, but it's kind of a balance. You don't want to have no investments and be broke your whole life and have to work until you die and be stressed about money your entire life. But you also don't want to be the richest guy in the cemetery, right? Die with all this money because you wasted your 20s. And so if you have an opportunity to go on a trip with your friends or backpack around Europe or stay in hostels or, do something generous for a friend or whatever it is, I would jump on those opportunities because, as someone 20 years your senior, your 20s go by quick and those opportunities come along less often than you realize. If your friend's like, oh, let's go on a trip and you say, I don't want to, I'm saving money, you're going to realize like when you're in your 30s, all those friends who are inviting you on trips all have stupid kids and stupid wives and, or maybe very smart wives and very smart kids. I don't know. Or very smart husbands. I don't know. Or stupid husbands. I don't know how smart your friends are or their theoretical future spouses. But the point is their theoretical future spouses are going to prevent these trips from happening. And so, I'm very comfortable with doing what you're currently doing, maxing out your Roth IRA and then spending the rest. But I would say if you go with that plan, think about devoting a portion of your future raises to your investments. And so maybe you're on pace to retire at 57 now, but someone who's just starting off at a $65,000 job as an analyst, it's probably going to increase their salary throughout the years. Maybe you're going to be making $100,000 as an analyst when you're 30. And if you can spend half of that raise and invest half that raise, you're going to amass a ton of money, millions of dollars, and be extremely wealthy and retire early. And I think that would be a great thing.
Nice. Thank you, Luca, for the question. So succinctly put. We love it.
Do you think Luca's destined for failure?
No, Luca's on a great path.
Luca, if I could buy stock in Luca, I would buy stock in Luca. I'm 90% VTSAX, 10% LUCA. Luca, if you're
LUCA,
that's how you spell Luca. That's his ticker symbol. If you ever make an ETF that's just the U ETF, I'm investing.
I wonder, wasn't that a Pixar film too, Luca? You're just really firing on all cylinders. Okay, let's go on to Scroll Patrol.
Scroll Patrol.
I've got a video from the internet. Jeremy has not seen it. He's going to review it live. Go ahead and click on that link and we'll watch this together.
All right. I have not seen this.
I think is in the news that people might remember is Takeoff dying.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't have a relationship with his father. So he's not married. He doesn't have any kids. His mother would get it. His mother and father would get it. His father didn't raise him, according to reports. So now this person is getting half of a $26 million estate and is probably going to continue to get money because there are royalties that would be going from all the songs that they had. So now this person who didn't raise you, probably didn't pay child support, didn't do whatever, gets half of your stuff instead of your mother. But of course, he was 20-something years old. He didn't think he was going to die.
Right.
So there's no plan. Not to mention the amount that the estate is going to have to pay in taxes. Aretha Franklin had a special needs son. They're looking for stuff on napkins and things like that. Or it can be as simple as siblings arguing because whatever beef they had growing up is going to show up when someone passes away.
Were they talking about, were they talking about a specific person or was she talking about a specific
do you know who Takeoff is?
Oh, no, I didn't clock that as a name. I heard Takeoff. I'm like, what is, I was very confused. What is Takeoff?
Do you know who the Migos are?
The Migos? I never even heard these words. Is that even a word?
They're a rap trio. Well, they were until Takeoff died.
Oh,
Cardi B, one of her baby daddies is one of the Migos.
Okay.
Do you know who Cardi B is?
I know that name. By the way, if you're new to the Personal Finance Club show, Jeremy does not know music.
But Cardi B?
I said I knew the name. That's pretty good.
Okay. Well, anyway, Takeoff is one of the Migos. He's a rapper. He passed away a few years ago, and I guess they're talking about his estate.
Okay. Well, yeah. Everything she said, I think. So, yeah, what she's saying is saying, hey, if you die when you're 20 and you don't have a will, who gets your stuff? And you probably don't have kids. And the answer is it goes to probate court. It goes to court. And then people basically fight over it. And then the law of the land decides. And, I'm not an estate planning attorney, and I don't know what state this is in. And, the amount I don't know about this situation could fill a barn, I'm sure.
Well,
But I
they're
think,
very rich rappers, so I guess that's why this matters, because they're like, I feel like there's other cases where it wouldn't necessarily matter as much, but this piece, his parents, I guess, were getting huge lumps of money and royalties and houses and things like that, of course, they didn't think he was going to pass away.
I don't know if she's right. I think what she's saying, and also if you're listening, there's like some words plastered over the video that says, nobody talks about this, but an absent parent can legally get half your estate if you die without a will. And is that true? And the answer is, I don't know. It really comes down to your jurisdiction, the probate court. I imagine if this went to probate court and, the mom could produce evidence that the dad never paid child support, was behind, was a deadbeat, wasn't in on his record deals, yada, yada, yada. I imagine judges have some leeway to say, my hands are tied, he's 50%. I don't think that's true. I think that other people can make claims. A sibling could make a claim, an aunt and uncle could make a claim. I think that's what probate court sorts out. Of course, the overarching message she's saying is true, which is, a will would solve this. A will doesn't avoid probate court, but a will makes it very clear what should happen in probate court. So, for example, if Takeoff was his name,
yes.
So if Takeoff had a will at 20,
this
which would
is
be
so
pretty surprising.
funny.
This is the whitest review of rapper violence.
The other one's name is Offset.
Takeoff and Offset.
Let me see,
what's the third's name?
Amigo? I can't remember.
Is it like Amigo?
Oh, Quavo. Yeah, Quavo. But his name is actually Quavius Keontae Marshall, so that actually came from his name. The other ones are just like Quavo. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So if Takeoff had a will, then his mom could bring the will to probate court and be like, "Yo, Takeoff had this will," and she even mentioned like Aretha Franklin, who, by the way, grew up on the street I used to run track practice on because she's a Detroit area. I would like run by Aretha's house.
That's so cool.
Yeah. There's a dirt road too. It's like I lived in like the nice area of Southeast Michigan outside Detroit.
Nice.
I can't fully guarantee that's true, by the way. That's just what we all said was true back then. And now, in this age of misinformation, was it true that maybe Aretha never lived there? Yeah, that's fully true. But it definitely tracks because like they were like big houses set way back. And if you like lived in Detroit, you would live around this area probably.
Right. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I hope it's true.
Yeah. Could probably look it up. Anyway, but they're saying even for Aretha, they're like looking at for like napkins and stuff because that's the kind of thing you take to probate court and say, yo, Aretha wrote on this napkin, give everything to my disabled kid. The judge is going to weigh that. And, of course, that's, this is kind of what estate planning is, which is to have a will and a trust along with a bunch of other stuff that says a will says who you want your stuff to go to, who you want your kids to go to, and things like that. And a trust is basically a way to avoid probate court altogether and say, okay, instead of even going to so for example, if Takeoff had a trust and all his money was going into a trust and there's a will that backed up the trust and the trust said, if I die, my mom gets everything, then you don't even need to go to probate court.
Yeah. Can I interrupt you real quick?
Yeah.
I'm on AI Overview about Aretha Franklin, and it said that Aretha Franklin's estate, estimated nearly $80 million, is being divided among her 4 sons, including her eldest son, Clarence, who has special needs and lives in assisted living. Following a lengthy legal battle, a Michigan jury validated a 2014 handwritten will found in a couch over a 2010 version, ensuring all her sons share the assets and royalties. Isn't that crazy?
Handwritten will found in a couch. That's crazy.
And like, somebody could have just like scribbled it. You know what I mean? This is crazy. I didn't even know. I didn't even know this. I should have done more research before I said
That's crazy. That's crazy. I was on jury duty. You know how I love talking about jury duty, and there was like facts of the case that were at question. And on one side, they had these like ironclad it was a real estate thing. These ironclad California realtor, legal documents that are like pages and pages of legalese. And on the other side, they had text messages basically saying the opposite. promising the opposite.
Right.
And our job as a jury was to get at the heart of the truth of the matter. What was the real deal between these two people? And we had to weigh both those things. And I think some people have this idea in their mind, like, oh, if it's not a legal document, it's not legal. I was like, that is not true. Like, a judge or a jury is going to look at this. And just like that judge did, the jury was like, we think the truth was these text messages were at the heart of the matter. This is the real deal. They signed the legal paperwork, blah, blah, blah. We're just going to go through with this. But the real deal is like, I'm not going to get into the facts of the case, but the real deal is you pay me back later or whatever it was. And that's how we found as a jury. And that's how this judge found. We're like, okay, I think the real deal was this handwritten one. You're right. Like, it's pretty sketchy. Like, did she write it? I mean, you assume the judge, that occurred to the judge, someone could have faked it, and so there was maybe a handwriting analysis with an expert done. Who knows what it is? But also the fact that the Michigan court at least starts to back up my theory that that she lived where I used to run by for trap practice. Because I was in Michigan. So I don't know. I think some of the stuff was a little bit alarmist. Kind of like, oh, the deadbeat dad's going to automatically get half. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I'd say the heart of the message is true, which is, if you want to decide what happens, don't leave it up to a judge deciphering, a couch will, like get something in writing. And, I think, if you're broke right now and you've got $20 to your name and you have a dog or something, like write up a thing and say, hey, if I die, I want my dog to do this, and I want my deadbeat dad to not get my $20 or whatever it is, and share with your mom. Put it in your dead box and share with your mom. If you're starting to
can't even have that $20, that's how bad he was.
Well, exactly. But I'm saying, the point is, like, your level of estate planning can grow with the size of your estate. So if you, and I hate the terms of estate planning, by the way. Estate just means all your stuff. If you have very little stuff, you should have something so your family knows what you want, knows what your wishes are, but there's not going to be a huge legal battle over your finances. Whereas if you start to have like 6-7 figures of money, suddenly lawyers can get involved and fight over this stuff because it's worth it now. And that's where you want to keep, so if you're like in the 6+ figure range, it's probably time to at least do an online version of a will and trust and do it well.
Okay.
Oh, so I have to give it a grade. I give it an A-.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, A-.
I agree with you. I think the heart of the matter is that, just do some planning, especially if you have a huge estate like that, like Aretha's $80 million. Although I'm surprised that it was only $80 million, because she did so much. But
that was a while ago, though, right? I feel like
it was a while. Well, she died like less than 10 years ago. But
okay, that was
I wonder if that's just like what they divided, not her total net worth. Okay, amazing. A-. Good job. Let's move on to money. Jeremy had time today.
I had time.
You have
We're going
time.
Back the archives again.
I'm in TikTok. Jeremy had a video about buying a car in cash. Let's take a look here.
Never borrow money for a car, period. Here's why. The average U.S. new car payment is $554 per month. Let's say you spend $300 per month on a car. The difference between those two numbers can make you a millionaire over a career if you invest it instead of spend it on a car. So how do you do this if you don't have any money? Well, first, in months 1 through 4, you bust, spike, borrow, beg your way to wherever you need to go. Not very fun and romantic, but it's worth it to be a millionaire later. In month 5, you take those $300 a month you've saved for 4 months, you've got $1,200 and you buy yourself a clunker that gets you where you need to go. Then in year 1, you sell your clunker for about what you paid for it, and then take the rest of those saved payments and buy yourself a solid $3,600 car. Then in year 3, you can sell your car, worth a little less now, plus all those payments you've been saving, and you can buy a car for $10,200. That's a very solid car. Then in year 5, and every 5 years after that, you can buy a car for $25,000. I feel like the end of that got cut off. I think this was back when TikTok cut you off at 60 seconds, and there was probably like 64 seconds. I was like, whatever, just post it.
Hilarious.
I like the cut of this guy's jib, man. This old TikTok Jeremy. And so
young
it's
naive
saying,
Jeremy.
Never borrow money for a car. And then what does and by the way, TikTok's a good place to find angry comments because people are really mean there because they don't know me. They're just seeing random stuff scroll by. But
yeah, I had fun in there. It's great.
What did the commenters say?
The comment said, "This is dumb. It's not accounting for taxes and insurance and registration fees. 3 cars in 3 years would cost as much as the first car."
Okay, so first of all, before I get to that, I do have to announce or whatever that times have changed, and the average car payment isn't like $500 a month anymore. It's $750. Our work is going unheard, Jen, because I posted this back in 2020 or whatever it was, and I said, don't borrow money for a car. And since then, people borrow more money. The average car payment's gone from $500 to $750. It's wild. And so that means if you can live on a $300 a month car total cost of ownership, you now, instead of having $250 to invest, you have $450 to invest. That'll make you a multimillionaire. And so this is more true than ever. That said, commenter, I think your comment might be dumb because he's basically saying the transactional costs are so high, you lose any value to kind of incrementally increasing in cars rather than just buying the big car first. And that's not true. First of all, and you're kind of reaching, I'll go from worst argument of yours to best argument. The worst argument is insurance. Insurance, you can stop and start to the day. Like I literally texted my insurance company a couple days ago and said, cancel my car insurance, like effective March 23rd. And they're like, done. That's just, they're in the business of insuring up to a day. And then as of that, anything I've paid beyond that, I get refunded, and anything, then I go to the other insurance company or the new car and I say, okay, start it on that day. So there's no transactional cost to switching insurance. I think it's even like legally true that they can't do that. They just insure you by the day. That's number one. So that is moot. In fact, he's even like, it costs as much as the nicer car, I think is what he's saying. That's not true, because nicer cars cost more to insure. And so if you're insuring cheaper cars, you're going to be paying less in insurance. So if you're paying the higher insurance rate all the time, you're going to be paying way more. And so doing this incremental thing actually saves you significant money in insurance because you're insuring cheaper cars until you get up to the car you want. Second thing you said, registration fees. That's not really true either, because you're registering both cars, and just like insurance, registration fees often scale with the value of the car. And so if you register one car in year one, and then you would stop registering that for year one and then start registering for year two. And, most states, I think, do year by year registration, and you can't get like pro rata refund if you don't use up the whole year. So for example, if I register in January and I sell the car in October, whoever bought my car basically gets a free registration for November and December. And so I've lost that money. So there's a little bit of truth to that part, which is like, okay, there might be some like double registration going on here for the months of overlap, depending on, the timeline. Although to my credit, I did say do it every single year, so you might be able to time it so there's very little of that overlap. But that said, that might be true. But on the flip side, again, since cheaper cars often register for less, Jen, do you have a sense of how much your registration is for your car? Because we
like
both live in the
or something.
Oh my God! Do you know what mine is? I just got it. It's on my desk somewhere.
Oh, is it higher for expensive cars?
My registration is $732.
It's like, I thought it was just a standard price.
Yeah, it's a very unfun surprise when you like. I was driving a '99 Ford Explorer. I thought I was like with you. I was like, oh yeah, $150, whatever it is. Then I bought my first new car and I got my $400 registration. And then I bought a Tesla and got my $700 registration per year. It's crazy.
I had no idea. I thought it was just like a statewide price.
No, it scales.
They were like, you're a piece of shit, Honda. Just give us $100.
All those libs up in Sacramento are trying to hook up the broke car drivers. But
damn, that's crazy.
That said, it's still $150. It's not like it's that cheap.
Yeah.
But my point to this comment is you would be paying lower registration fees along the way rather than paying that $700 every year. And so that's also kind of cuts against your argument. You'd be better off driving the cheaper car for a while. And then the best case you make is taxes, which is, yeah, for sure, almost every state is going to get you on. No, that's not true, almost every other state, but states that have sales tax are going to get you on sales tax when you buy a new car. And so when you buy and that's a transactional thing. That's not an annual thing like the insurance and the registration are that you'd be paying anyway. And so for taxes, for sure, when you buy your $1,200 car, if you have 5% tax rate in your state, you're going to be paying $60 in sales tax. When you buy your $3,000 car, 5% of that is $150. And, that kind of sucks, but it's on the scale of things, it's relatively small and definitely way smaller than the cost of the big car, right? Would you rather have a $750 per month car payment or a one-time $150 sales tax fee, right? The scale is dramatically different. And so his exaggerated argument, you'd be better off with the more expensive car the whole time, is like fully, strictly, totally false. And there's like a few little transactional things, like some states have a title transfer fee, which is like $20 or $50. But really, they all kind of add up to like less than like a month's worth of savings. And it depends on the scale of your car. If you're selling a car for $100,000, sales tax on that would be significant. But, in my example I gave, doing this incrementally smaller cars totally still definitely makes sense. And so, this commenter, there's like a little twinge of truth. There's some transactional costs for switching cars, which are annoying, but they don't negate the savings from driving a cheaper car and saving all that huge monthly payment you're trying to avoid.
Wow, you told them.
I told you, little anonymous TikTok commenter from many years ago. We really danced on his grave. He's going to be so sad when maybe he's a PFC super fan all these years later.
Are they dead?
Or maybe he's dead. That's a good point. Way to
you
really
said dance on his grave, so I'm like, where did that come from?
Oh, I meant like his little comment grave, like, I guess. But that's fair. I am the one who brought up death. We always seem to end these shows on a very low note.
Wasn't ready for that.
But speaking of ending the show, it's time for the end. And so keep buying those cheap cars. What else do we talk about? Oh yeah, keep maxing out your Roth IRA if you have an expensive 401k, or do both. That'd be fine too. And hopefully we're not in a recession, but if we are, that's probably not going to matter much to you because you just got to keep doing your things. And what are your things? It's following the 2 rules of Personal Finance Club. Rule number 1, live below your means. And rule number 2, invest early and often. See you next week.
The Personal Finance Club show is produced by Jeremy Schneider and Jen Mundia. Music by Esabalu and Homie. Send your questions to podcast@personalfinanceclub.com. The Personal Finance Club show is co-hosted by Jeremy Schneider, who is a co-owner of Nectarine, an SEC-registered investment advisor. The views expressed on this show are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Nectarine. Please refer to hellonectarine.com for all relevant disclosures. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as personalized investment advice or a solicitation to buy or sell any security. Listeners should consult their own financial, legal, or tax professionals for advice specific to their situation.